Illustrious speakers include Dr. Karobi Lahiri, Dr. Sharad Bhomaj, Dr. Swapnesh Sawant, Dr. Deepti Kulkarni. Dr. Karobi Lahiri is our first speaker, and she will be speaking to us about evaluation of pediatric trauma. Now, before she starts her presentation, this is the universally followed eye injury terminology. Either it's an open globe injury or a closed globe injury. An open globe injury implies a full thickness defect in the wall of the eye, which means cornea, limbus, sclera, anywhere, or even around the optic nerve. A closed globe injury implies that there's no full thickness defect. A closed globe injury could be a contusion or a partial thickness laceration, whereas an open one could be a rupture, which is more because of a blunt injury causing a pressurization and a depressurization of the globe. It could be a laceration. Laceration could be a penetrating injury where the object has entered on one side and there's a single wound of entry, which in case of a sharp object like a knife could also be the exit wound also, or it could be a perforating injury where there are two full thickness lacerations. So there's an entry wound and an exit wound also. All these things are important for uniformity of our conversation and conveying the findings and eventually for the results and research. There's also the zones of injury which are important for prognostication. Zone 1 is up the central cornea up to the limbus. Zone 2 is from the limbus up to the annulus of Zinn. I'm sorry, it's about 5 millimeters from the limbus, and then the zone 3 is from that ring of 5 millimeters around the limbus posteriorly to the annulus of Zinn and even beyond. Generally speaking, injuries of zone 3 and particularly the ones of zone 3 posterior are prognosis. I now invite Dr. Karobi Lahiri, who's an expert in pediatric vitreoretinal surgery, to tell us about evaluation and management of pediatric eye trauma. Dr. Karobi Lahiri, she is the head of department at Bombay Hospital Vitreoretinal Department and an expert in ROP apart from vitreoretinal trauma in pediatrics. How do I unshare my screen, sir? Do I stop the video? If I stop the video, does it get unshared? Somebody from Numerotech, please. It's not getting unshared.
Sir, at the top center, there might be a drop down.
Sorry. Got it. Pause share. Yeah. Karobi, please share your screen.
As soon as yours stops sharing. I can still see your screen.
On?
You have paused it, sir. You have to stop. Yes, sir.
It's up.
Okay, can you all see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, go into the play mode so that it becomes a full screen now.
Just a moment. Okay. Paritosh, thank you so much for this invitation to be on your IC. the topic for today is pole to pole surgery in children. Now, when we talk about pole to pole surgery, it obviously means right from the cornea right up to the optic nerve and anything in its pathway which is affected by a certain problem. And sometimes there are multiple problems, and you have to deal with them either at one go or at multiple sessions. So the most important factor in these are cases of trauma where simultaneous injury has occurred to numerous structures, or there can be other conditions where you have to deal with things in the anterior segment as well as in the posterior segment. Now, ocular trauma is a topic of unresolved controversies, and there are continuous controversial and debatable management issues with this. Now, the type of injuries that we know is the open globe injuries and the closed globe injuries. And the injuries in children are very complex, and the problems are mostly related to where you have to place the incision, how you have to do the surgery, and also during the surgery the adherence of the PVD, which is a major thing to combat. And there are post-operative problems like post-operative inflammations, traction retinal detachments, PVR formations, subretinal membrane formations, and these things present uh, later after the surgery, and sometimes the patient itself presents late because they're following the onset of macular separation or PVR. So these are few examples of the open globe injuries where you have a disruption of the anterior segment as well as a retinal detachment with vitreous hemorrhage at the back. There could be cracker or blast injuries. It could be at one time during the Mahabharata serial, we had the bow and arrow injuries where these were associated with endophthalmitis along with sometimes foreign bodies in the eye. And these foreign bodies generally used to be the wood of the broomstick, and they used to cause a lot of fungal endophthalmitis. And this is one of the old, because these are not really seen too many nowadays, and this was something which I had borrowed from Dr. Natarajan to show that there was a foreign body which he has removed, and this is how the endophthalmitis has created, which has to be combated. Now, the problems in children are that injuries in children are very complex, and as I mentioned, that there are numerous problems which relate to what the postoperative sequelae are due to. Now, the occurrences at the back along with vitreous hemorrhage could be presence of detachments which may come on simultaneously, but rather they come on a little later, and the occurrence of these with the closed globe injuries are more common. Now, this is another patient where the thing is that the post-inflammatory, after the detachment there is a recurrence of RD, and there is an inflammatory membrane on the macula. Now, the stages of repair generally would be either a primary repair followed by a secondary repair, where the primary repair closes whatever is the wound of entry, and that is, if it's the cornea, it's the cornea, if it's the cornea sclera or the sclera. And then if there is a cataract where the rupture of the anterior capsule is there, you have to remove it at the first go. But if it is a self-sealing one, then you preserve it for a later date where you repair the cornea or the corneosclera, and then follow it up with USG. And following that, after about 10 to 14 days, you can go ahead for the secondary surgery where you tackle the other problems at that point of time. The ideal timing is generally for the primary surgery is is between 100 days to 7 days for the secondary surgery, but early vitrectomy has more intraoperative problems, and a delayed vitrectomy is better because it has a formation of a PVD, but there are more postoperative problems with a delayed vitrectomy. So there are certain prerequisites that you have to do. That is, if you can image, you can do a USG, you can do X-rays or a CT scan, especially if you're feeling that there is a foreign body, because it helps to determine the nature and the location of the foreign body. So this is a case which is again a pole-to-pole repair where you find there was a foreign body. This happened to a child who had worn his glasses, and he fell on a stone, and the glass pieces, the uh, pieces from the uh, eyeglass had entered into the eye, and the primary repair was done earlier, and this is the secondary repair where a keratoprosthesis is put. We have removed the first foreign body which was seen in the wound, and later when you do a vitrectomy, you find another second glass foreign body which is there inside the eye, which is further again removed, and later the keratoprosthesis is removed and it is replaced by a corneal graft. So this is the second foreign body. This is the PFCL injection and the placement of the corneal graft. Now, coexistence with all these injuries is those like in the anterior segment, you could get hyphema, angle recessions, iris dissertions, lens injuries, scleral or corneal tears, orbital fractures. And in the posterior segment, you could get vitreous hemorrhage, retinal tears, commotio retinae, choroidal ruptures or detachment, macular holes, avulsed optic nerves, subretinal hemorrhages, and retinitis sclerotidia in the later part. And in the intraocular foreign bodies, you can get both the magnetic or the non-magnetic type of foreign bodies. Now, the thing is, these are other associations which I already mentioned, and the vitreous hemorrhage is often a accompaniment of a blunt trauma, and this is a manifestation of either a iridodialysis or a ciliary body trauma or an avulsion of retinal vessels, where there is a breakdown, subretinal bleed from a choroidal rupture or a Terson syndrome, or a shaken baby syndrome, or a whiplash injury. This is another condition where the child is shaken and you get manifestations, and the child may be even comatose and have hemorrhages in the eye. So hemorrhages in the eye in a child especially has to be seen in the light of the view that it could be a shaken baby or what we call as a non-accidental trauma these days. So what is the this? We have to kind of restore the integrity of the globe. We have to allow the resolution of the hypotony, and you have to prevent infection from entering. And that is done by identify the full extent of the injury. You have a foreign body, so you have to remove it, whether it's metallic or superficial, and reposition of uveal tissue. If it is many days old, then it's better to cut it out, and the lens removal at the second go if the capsule is intact. So this is what I said was important, because the ultrasound gives us a good idea of what is happening in the posterior segment, so we know what to tackle and what to do before we go in. And foreign bodies, whether it's in which part, so that you could decide, because a foreign body like this which is placed near the pars plana area could just require a kind of a superficial kind of entry to remove it. Now, associations of a cataract, as I mentioned, that either at the first stage if it's broken, or later if it is the capsule is intact. And the secondary procedure could be a vitrectomy with either a belt buckling or a laser surgery interspersed with a cataract or a suprachoroidal hemorrhage drainage, a retinal detachment repair, a giant retinal tear repair, and intraocular foreign body which is removed accordingly.
Ruby, you will have to sum up, please.
Okay, fine. I'll just These are a few examples of cases where the pole-to-pole surgery has been done. This is where a cornea is removed, and after doing a vitrectomy, you place it with another graft. This is another patient, a highly kind of a dysmorphic looking eye, and how you rehabilitated by doing a pole-to-pole surgery. And removal of a foreign body, which is always a challenge. This is after the cataract is removed, you go ahead and remove the IOFB from its portion. This is a patient of endophthalmitis with foreign body. This is Dr. Preetham's this. He has kindly given me his video for it's a beautiful video which shows the removal of the matter along with removal of the foreign body. And then comes the ROP, where this is again another pole-to-pole surgery, non-traumatic, where you have to go and literally work from the anterior segment involving a lensectomy, vitrectomy, and right up to the optic nerve, where you're doing a dissection of the membrane and going further down to the truncated part at the optic nerve. And these are other cases of endophthalmitis with foreign body removals and the outcomes. This is a case of vitreous hemorrhage following trauma, which is removed. Inflammatory membrane being removed in a child at the second go. And this is how we, this is with a K-Pro surgery. This is where you do it with a corneal graft. And this is just to show you that these cases can be tackled endoscopically also. But if the cornea is distorted or not there, then you have to replace it with a graft. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Karobi, for a wonderful exposition. You may please stop sharing the screen. And our next speaker is Dr. Swapnesh Sawant, who's the medical director of Anideep Eye Hospital. He'll speak to us about vitreous hemorrhage in a severely injured eye, evaluation and management.
Thank you, Paritosh sir, for considering me for this instruction course. And thank you, Moscon, for accepting our instruction course. So my topic is approach to vitreous hemorrhage in trauma cases. Sir has already illustrated the Ocular Trauma Society classification. The latest version is what he has spoken about. Just to add something is in an open globe injury, the rupture mechanism is from inside to outside, whereas the laceration mechanism is from outside to inside. So this is what we should keep in mind. I would like to discuss a brief about the cellular constituents of any vitreous hemorrhage, or for that matter, any traumatic injury to the eye. There is first an activation of the cytokines, which are liberated by the inflammatory cells, and the first cells to arrive at the site are the macrophages. However, soon the RPE cells arrive at the site, and the study of these membranes have shown that younger the membrane, there are more amount of RPE cells on it, and as the membrane in the wound or on the traumatic site gets older, the RPE cells start reducing in size. Hepatocyte growth factor is one of the important growth factors which stimulates the RPE cells to change its character from an epithelial cell to a more fibroblastic cell or a mesenchymal cell. Glial cells also are important. They are identified by the immunohistochemistry because of the glial fibrillary acidic protein that they secrete, and they are seen around the areas of retinal holes and retinal breaks. They are independently present only in simple cases of epiretinal membranes. There is another group of inflammatory cells called as myofibroblasts, which are usually seen around the wound, which are the major cells which are responsible for the contraction of the PVR membranes that we see. On top of all this, when the fibrosis matures, there is a laydown of the extracellular matrix, mainly the collagen 1 and the collagen 3, which is responsible for the abnormal adhesions, abnormal contracture forces, which negate the natural adhesive forces. And the following is a list of the growth factors, which also have a small role to play. The major anatomical responses to any vitreous hemorrhage or any hemorrhage in the eye would be causation of the PVD, traction lardi, as I explained to you, post-traumatic PVR. And we should always be on a lookout, even in a case of hemorrhage, for whether there is an underlying RD, traumatic endophthalmitis, which is there, which is confused picture with vitreous hemorrhage, or there is a IFB, which we have missed. Obviously, we look out for in mild vitreous hemorrhages, we look out for choroidal ruptures and peripheral retinal tears if it is permissible to have a good examination with the indirect ophthalmoscopy. Usually, in a close group injury, the hemorrhage is from ciliary body, retinal or choroidal vessels, and there could be associated underlying retinal tear, as I told you. Indirect ophthalmoscopy can be done with a scleral depression with a very gentle hand, only when we are sure that there is no missed open globe injury. And there's an important role of a gentle sterile B scan, which I would like to show you. This particular is a comparative B scan showing of a subhyaloid hemorrhage only, which was there because of an underlying small HST and a very shallow peripheral retinal detachment, wherein other case is more like a taut PHF with underlying echos. Not very sure this could be RD also when we go inside. So a good B scan done by the consultant himself is very important. This is more of an intragel vitreous hemorrhage and a very mild vitreous hemorrhage showing a point attachment. So we can plan our surgery, and in fact, in this patient, if the vitreous hemorrhage is clearing up, we can wait and watch if we have a fairly decent view of the retina. Some other examples, like in this case, you can see there is an underlying already two-quadrant RD, which is there with the attachment to the detached PVD over here. Here there is a closed funnel RD with a pre as well as subretinal echos, suggestive of hemorrhage pre as well as in the subretinal space. And over here, there is vitreous hemorrhage, there is underlying RD plus a dislocated nucleus, which is seen in the post-trauma cases. So timing of surgery, as ma'am has told, is very important because around 7 to 10 days after this traumatic vitreous hemorrhage is occurred, there will be PVD, which makes a surgery slightly easier, and the uveal congestion is less, and there is a lesser possibility of uncontrollable vitreous hemorrhage. In open globe injury, I think ma'am has put forward all the points, so this discussion is already done. Only thing which I would like to highlight is the MRI is best reserved for conditions of wooden, plastic, IOFBs, whereas CT scan is reserved for ferromagnetic IOFBs. However, the Hounsfield units, which are calculated depending upon what is the absorption power of these foreign bodies, metallic foreign bodies, really is almost equal for all the metals. So it really can't say whether it is it's a magnetic or a non-magnetic foreign body. It's almost the same for all the metallic foreign bodies. And the suspicion of endophthalmitis is always to be kept in mind. So sequence should be repair of the laceration, if possible, lens management, vitreous handling, and retinal repair at the same go, or differ depending upon the situation and the expertise of the surgeon. I would like to share this video of a traumatic retinal detachment, a typical case where we are clearing the vitreous around the ports, approaching with the core vitrectomy. You would be able to see other features of this trauma in this case, where peripapillary heme as well as a bit of Berlin's edema. Induction of PVD as usual is very, very important, which can be noted in this video. So a gentle induction is important because on the nasal side, there is a edematous retina, which your forces of induction of PVD can cause unnecessary iatrogenic breaks. Vitreous-based dissection is very important. This is a phakic patient, so you have to be really careful in your maneuvers inside the eye, and you don't want to have a post-operative cataract formation. Also, there could be some residual subretinal tissue which is left behind because of trauma, and you need to clear that. I've made a retinotomy because approach to that particular area on FG is going to be a challenge in a phakic patient. and fluid air exchange is done. And because the area, the horns of the dialysis or the edges of the dialysis, I have cryoed in this particular case, and the rest of the area, the retinopexy is done with the help of a green laser. So this is one more case where a patient was referred after the initial wound repair was done. Patient had a torn iris with a subluxated cataractous lens as well as a vitreous hemorrhage inside. What you can see is the initiation of the surgery with the lensectomy, followed by the core vitrectomy. Dissection is going to be difficult because it was almost a month old after the reference was done. And you have to go layer by layer, where finding the correct plane to enter the posterior hyaloid space is crucial to have lesser iatrogenic breaks. As you can see, almost chicken fat-like or mutton fat-like thick vitreous hemorrhage is plastered over the retina. And sorry. Is plastered over the retina, and literally you have to go layer by layer to dissect out the thick vitreous hemorrhage. And I would like to show it's going to be tough to dissect it over the optic nerve head because there is underlying RD. Going to use LPFC as a third hand, and almost I am successful in doing that. And what I'm going to show you is a carpet rolling of this entire thick layer. So as you can see, this carpet rolling of the thick layer of the vitreous hemorrhage and the underlying very edematous retinal detachment. So you have to be patient with these surgeries. You have to be ambidextrous, and you can see that adherent vitreous layer is rolled off. So you have to take your time, have a calm mind, and approach these cases. Apply all your skill as well as principles to get out of this sticky situation. PFCL is injected, and then it makes life more easier. And at the end, I think the case is closed with oil inside. This is the immediate post-op picture, where you can see, as I told you, a lot of RP deposition and 6 month as well as a 1 year follow-up of this case. So cornerstone is evaluation, a good evaluation from cornea to optic nerve. And in the end, I would also like to mention a good pharmacotherapy post-surgery is also crucial to reduce the inflammation and to have better outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Swapnesh, for a very nice exposition of the management of vitreous hemorrhage with and without retinal detachment. Did you put an encircling band in the previous case?
Yes, sir.
Or the last two cases?
No, not the first one, but the second case, yes, I had put.
Okay. I would normally tend to put an encircling band in these cases, especially the phakic ones, because our dissection of the vitreous base is a little bit guarded in those cases. But excellent videos, and thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Deepti Kulkarni, who will talk to us about intraocular foreign bodies and their management. Dr. Deepti Kulkarni is a senior vitreoretinal surgeon at Dr. Anil Kulkarni Eye Hospital in Meerut. Deepti, please go ahead with your presentation.
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you, Dr. Paritosh sir, for having me in your IC. It's been a privilege to work alongside you here, and thank you, MOS too. I'll be discussing about managing IOFBs today. First of all, the ball game with IOFB changes entirely because all this while we have been seeing that we wait for the PVD to occur and then do vitrectomy. But when we are suspecting an IOFB, then we have to operate as early as possible. There have been studies to show that a delay of more than 24 hours can increase the risk of endophthalmitis by 4-fold, and this is a huge number. So we must actively look for an IOFB in every case of trauma. Even if we assume that it is closed globe injury, we must first rule out an IOFB and only then decide our next course of management. So the nature of the injury helps us plan for the treatment and also helps in prognostication because this is a very big issue in cases of trauma and the patients need to be counseled much more than in other cases. This picture I would like to share here, although it looks like AMD or something of an adult case or rather old age case. It's not so. It's a young boy who had an open globe injury and he went close to his grandmother when she was sewing something. And the lesion or the large hemorrhage that we see at the macular area is actually a point of exit. He had a small wound at the limbus. Somehow there was not much vitreous hemorrhage. He came within a couple of hours of his trauma, but he didn't come back for the next 2 days. And by the time he came back, he was in a full-blown endophthalmitis, and unfortunately, we couldn't save his eye. But in cases like this, it is imperative that we must impress upon the patients also the need for early intervention. I won't go into the details now here because it will be a repetition. Basically, what can the IFB do to our eyes? First of all, there can be a suppurative reaction, not just with an expected infective foreign body, but also with other substances like copper, zinc, mercury, or nickel. Iron and copper do cause specific reactions, we know that. Inert materials may not cause any reaction at the outset, but they're likely to have a local reaction and fibrosis or encapsulation as time passes by. So it is important that these foreign bodies be removed too. Where a foreign body is also decides a further course of management. If we suspect that it is there in the anterior chamber and we're not able to view it, it makes sense to do a gonioscopy. If the media is not clear, then perhaps an anti-segment OCT or UBM will be our guide to help it. If it is in the iris, we must be careful to note where it is and remove it equally carefully as well. Posterior chamber, again, approach changes. The vitrectomy like we do for a plas plana vitrectomy for hemorrhages or the other cases. And I'll go into the details of the foreign body later. How are we supposed to image this IFBs? This has evolved from plain X-rays to CTs. CTs today are the preferred choice of imaging. An axial or coronal cut less than 1.5 mm is preferred so that we can localize and also determine the size of the foreign body. If we suspect a metallic foreign body, obviously we defer an MRI. B-scan ultrasonography is perhaps the most valuable tool in imaging or documenting an IOFB. An IOFB gives a steeply rising echo and a strong sound attenuation. And we can also evaluate the surrounding areas, the vitreous, the retina, and the choroid too. Now, in this case, we see that there is a small area which can be a foreign body. And once we place the A vector over that foreign body, we know that there is a 100% steep rise. So we know that we are going to find a foreign body here when we take up this patient for surgery. Also, the risk of infection has to be expected and assumed unless proved otherwise. And so broad spectrum antibiotics are of help. A most important point to note here is that antiemetics have to be given as a primary plan during our management because vomiting can precipitate expulsion. I won't go into the details, just to point out that iron particles cause degenerative changes. Epithelial structures are affected the most. So right from the lens to the cornea to even the retinal pigment, there can be retinal pigmentation similar to RP also. And since this iron can cause devastating side effects, early treatment for iron foreign bodies is imperative. Copper also causes a lot of damage. More than 85% copper results in a severe full-blown endophthalmitis. And then it's very difficult to discern whether this is an infective or copper-related. So when we are suspecting a foreign body, we have to do an early intervention as far as possible. Now, this case again was a tricky one where a part of the foreign body was stuck in the sclera and there was an intraretinal foreign body as well. So when we know that there's a foreign body in the cornea, then we must make sure we inject some viscoelastic, protect the structures in the AC, and then remove the foreign body. Iris, again, a very careful handling because it can cause bleeding and then it clouds our field of surgery. Lens warrants surgery like cataract and IOL placement. Posterior segment surgery, depending on the size of the foreign body and where it is located, we can either go transscleral or intravitreal. IFB again depends on various factors, even if it is in the posterior segment, whether the patient is conscious and are there any life-threatening conditions he's dealing with. In that case, that is the only case where we can postpone. Otherwise, it has to be done immediately. Many instruments have been used by many surgeons. Of these instruments, I have only one which is similar like this. This suture basket technique has been reported with great success, a rare earth magnet for ferrous bodies. This is what Dr. Bape and Mahesh Mugan sir had published about. And there are few studies which show the use of a nitinol stole basket. Although this is a urology instrument, This has been used for larger foreign bodies with great success. If it is an intraretinal foreign body, then there are two approaches that can be followed. One is the transscleral approach, where a flap is created, the choroid diathermy is done to prevent the bleed, then it is incised and the foreign body removed. Although literature says that cryo is not needed, most surgeons prefer to do it, and most surgeons even prefer to place a buccal prophylactically. A transvitreal approach, again a pars plana vitrectomy. If there is a capsule around the foreign body, that has to be removed carefully. A PX scale may be used to protect the posterior pole, and the foreign body is excised. Often, the sclerotomy wound needs to be enlarged for the foreign body to come outside. All the other principles are the same: laser, oil, as and when required. This is one which I wanted to highlight here because this gets talked about very little, and in our area it is very common. Starting with winter season, from now up to early summer, we get a lot of caterpillar hair, and it's a very painful affair for the doctor and the patient as well. Right from the eyelid to the conjunctiva to the sclera and cornea, anterior segment, and rarely even the posterior segment, when children tend to rub their eyes, or they have something on their toy and they have injury along with the caterpillar hair. So these cause a very severe inflammatory response. Most of the times there is so much hypopyon, we cannot see any structures in the AC if there is a foreign body inside the eye, and it is very difficult to remove. We prefer to do this under sedation even for adults, and in children under short GA. So this also is one foreign body that we must make a point to note in our minds when we are looking at foreign bodies or open globe injuries with severe inflammation. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepti, for a most wonderful presentation on IOFBs. Our next speaker is Dr. Sharad Bhomaj. He is the director of Shanti Saroj Netralaya in Meerut, a very senior vitreoretinal surgeon and an excellent vitreoretinal surgeon. He will talk to us about vitreoretinal surgery in badly injured eyes. While Dr. Sharad loads his presentations, Karobi,
Deepti, can you share the screen? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead. Karobi, are you still there? No. Okay.
Yes, I'm still there.
Yeah, Karobi, so can you give some tips about how one would examine a child who comes with injury and you don't know, whether it's open globe, closed globe? How do you tackle such a child, and how do you patav him to allow you to examine the child?
See, first of all, when the history is very important, because if the parents know how the child has got injured, it gives you an insight of what could have really happened, whether he was hit by a stone, or he fell down on a stone, or something went into his eye, or something has injured his eye while playing some kind of toy, or sometimes it can be knife injuries, etc., which the child, it suddenly falls, like, and the child injures himself. So the history is very, very important, and also always watch the parents when they are giving you this history, the parents or the relatives who are there, because many a times if you find them a little shifty on the history, you know that there is some kind of sort of manipulation in the story that they are telling you. So you have to be alert to that. Then the thing is that if, like, generally the patient comes, they have generally patched the patient when they come. So the thing is, then the child is generally crying and howling away. So first is, like, you have to, like, sort of allay the child, and but you have to examine. So what do is that first you put the patient, if it's a small patient, you hold the hands above the head, and ask somebody to hold the knees, and then you have your to this specula, which are ready, not specula, I would say, just those retractors ready, where you have to put in a lot of lignocaine, and then you do a careful external examination, and then if it is possible, if you feel that it is safe, then just go and put in a little bit of lignocaine along with this tear emollient, a drop, and then you put in your speculum, and just sort of prise the eye open and just try to see what is the extent of injury. You have to take care that you kind of do it towards the outer side and not giving any kind of pressure on the globe. And suppose you feel that there is definitely a large injury, then it is safer to close it and do this examination directly on the table under GA, because there you would get an assessment, but you have to give the kind of prognosis to the patients, because sometimes the lens matter is out, sometimes the vitreous is out, sometimes it's a corneoscleral wound, sometimes it's a self this. So that is how you generally do the examination. You have to hold the child, because otherwise if you don't hold the child, he's not going to allow you. Even older children, it is very difficult, more in older children than in younger children, because they have strength on their side, and they generally would be sort of resisting any kind of this. So no pressure has to be given. That is the most important thing. And suppose say the injury is such, then you go and assess whatever is the nature of the injury, see what is the pupillary reaction, whether any other structures that you can see are done. And then if it is an open globes injury, you have to also take a history whether the patient has had a fasting period for a certain period of time, and then go ahead and schedule your surgery and do the rest of the things on the table itself.
Thank you, Karobi. Dr. Sharad is ready with his presentation. Please go ahead, Sharad.
Yeah, this is a video, so I'll just play the video. Deepti, please start. Yeah. Can we hear the audio?
No, not really. You can just see the video.
I'll increase the volume on my PC so that you'll be able to hear.
Are you able to hear? No.
You can give a running commentary.
Yeah. So start from the beginning. Start from the beginning. Yeah. Yes, I'll just show a video showing some of the pearls which we need to keep in mind while managing these badly injured eyes. So the most important thing is to have a meticulous wound closure, primary wound closure. So many times the scleral injuries which are posterior can go not properly sutured. So that's very important to have a properly tight, watertight wound so that it can withstand the second intervention. The second important thing is in these eyes, we need to have an early surgery between 3 to 7 days to maximum 10 days, because most of these eyes have got a detachment, subretinal blood, and many of them are having a retinal incarceration. All these issues have to be tackled as early as possible. The third important thing is that we cannot rely on ultrasound in complex trauma to make our decisions. If there is a detachment, it can miss. And if there is not a detachment, we can feel that there is a detachment. So we have to base our decisions of intervention based on the clinical assessment. And the thing is that when you are not able to see the retina, you just intervene. The other thing is that these badly traumatized eyes, the visibility can be an issue. So surprisingly, by doing corneal epithelial debridement, by using a non-contact viewing system and using viscoat to coat the endothelium, there can be a dramatic increase in the visibility. If there is a phakic patient, then we should do a lensectomy, which can dramatically again increase the visibility. So you can see in this patient, the cornea, how it was looking, but you can see that we are able to perform all the necessary steps in this patient in spite of having a bad cornea. So you can see the use of non-contact visual, and if that is not possible, then we do a temporary keratoprosthesis, and then we go ahead with doing the intervention. So we can see one such case where the cornea was totally opaque, and then we put a temporary keratoprosthesis and we did the detachment surgery. All the steps could be done, and this retina was very stiff, so it needed a retinectomy and PFCL injection, removal of the subretinal blood. And you can see that the temporary keratoprosthesis is excellent. At the end of the surgery, we place a graft and then remove the oil at a later date. So most of these patients we can do anatomically. The other thing is that patient counseling is extremely important, because some of the patient, if you don't talk to them properly, they just go shopping from one clinic to another and then the surgery is delayed. So this is a similar case which has been operated somewhere else, and 1 month later we are seeing this young
Sharad, we are not able to hear you clearly. Maybe if you stop the video, not the presentation, continue with the screen share.
yeah. Are you
You know, down below there are two buttons. One is mute and other is start video or stop video. So you stop the video, don't stop sharing the screen, just stop. So that may help to transmit the sound better. You won't be seen, but your voice will be heard.
So are you able to hear me now?
Yes, sir, but it is a little sketchy. So you put off your video. I'll keep sharing your video from my screen here. And your video that you're using the device on, that video you put off, sir.
Sharad, please unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Sir is, I can hear some bits of his video here, where he had put a PFCL and then he exchanged the PFCL with the oil directly.
So you're not able to hear me?
Now I'm able to hear you.
Okay. So this is one of the cases where, okay.
This was a suprachoroidal hemorrhage.
So play the video. Yeah. So the other important thing is that we have to recognize the suprachoroidal hemorrhages very early.
Drainage of suprachoroidal hemorrhage, vitrectomy is done. Lipids were lasered and oil was placed.
Me now? You're able to hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, these are foreign body patients can create multiple problems. This is a pediatric patient, and you can see the multiple, the huge amount of PVR and multiple breaks which are post foreign body removal. And this can be avoided where, you can have very large foreign body impact sites close to the macula. So whenever you see a very massive hemorrhage in a case of foreign body, then that's not a very good sign, because it can indicate a lot of choroidal damage, as well as there may be a retinal vascular injury which is causing this kind of hemorrhage. So you can see this is one of the patients where he had a massive vitreous hemorrhage with a foreign body, and after doing the PVD, we could see multiple foreign body impaction sites. So most of these impaction sites were there, multiple of them, and one was very close to the macula, which was along the superiotemporal arcade. So some of these patients will have very bad retinal ectopia, macular ectopia and scarring in the post-operative period, though initially they might do well. So in this patient, we did a wide ILM peel, which was around the foreign body impaction sites, multiple foreign body impaction sites. And later on, the large foreign body impaction site, lot of choroid was exposed. So we did a deep diathermy to the choroid, and we ablated the choroid. So this is called as a choroidectomy or a chorioretinectomy. This is also useful in patients where a bad incarceration is seen in trauma patients. So with these patients, with this chorioretinectomy, they do well. And you can see the post-operative OCT scan of this patient where it shows a flat choroidal scar and there is no reproliferation. So this patient is maintaining 6/18 vision. So another patient of a foreign body with a subretinal abscess. So we had to excise the entire necrotic retina and evacuate the subretinal exudates. And then, in this particular case, because the foreign body was impacted so firmly in the ocular coat, we explored the foreign body entry site from outside and removed it from the external route. So sometimes the foreign bodies are better and safely removed through the external route, as shown in this particular patient of a large foreign body which is impacted in the ocular coat. So we could remove it from the outside. So transcleral foreign body removal should be employed whenever it is feasible and whenever it is more safe to do than an intraocular maneuver. So at the end, after doing all these multiple interventions, we are left with an aphakic eye in many patients. So we have to reconstruct the iris, and sometimes we also need an aniridia IOL. So this is one of the examples which we are seeing. Aniridia SFIL has been placed. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharad. Excellent presentations, excellent videos as usual. Very good work, very nice. There was a question about use of MRI for detecting intraocular foreign bodies. So one needs to be careful that it's not, you're not suspecting a metallic one, yes. And second, most important nowadays, a lot of people have all sorts of implants put into them. So including certain, dental needles and dental caps and whatnot. So one has to make sure that none of those are magnetic as well. While I'm sharing my screen, just another question to the panelists. Basically, the role of one moment, please. Yeah, the role of systemic antibiotics. Under what circumstances would you give systemic antibiotics, and where would you just restrict yourself to local and intravitreal antibiotics? Hello?
Yes, sir.
So let's start with Sharad.
Yeah, actually, if we want to give any open globe injury, we have to give prophylactic antibiotics. Most of the time, oral antibiotics are quite fine. But if you have a frank traumatic endophthalmitis, then IV antibiotics along with the intraocular antibiotics and doing the surgery, all of them are supportive. They are useful.
Deepti?
So for all open globe injuries, I think it's worth giving an IV antibiotic at the outset itself because the blood ocular barrier is broken. So this antibiotics they'll give us more benefit than being in doubt and not giving them. So IV antibiotics for all open globe injuries, sir.
Would Swapnesh and Karobi agree to that? I agree with that.
I prefer to give at least 3 to 5 days of oral antibiotics to all my operated patients. So the thing is that irrespective, and the intravitreal of course would definitely be there when there is an endophthalmitis which is there. And open globe, as was mentioned, is definitely an indication for an antibiotic because it's preventive.
I generally tend to inject prophylactically also, at least vancomycin and ceftazidime, where even if it in any open globe injuries as well. So Apnesh, you have any other views?
Additionally, because the patient is there in the OT, I also encourage use of IV antibiotics. I request the anesthetist to just push in IV taxane for whatever work it is, because it's a direct parenteral route that we can access and then continue the same in the work.
Thank you. While we were all discussing different things, there is one aspect which we must not forget, and that is occult globe rupture. So whenever one finds a deep AC, posterior iris retraction, relative hypotony, extensive hemorrhagic chemosis, vitreous hemorrhage with or without a conjunctival tear, subconjunctival hemorrhage, hyphema may or may not be present, and RAPD may or may not be present, and a poor visual acuity, and especially a decreased ocular motility, please suspect an occult globe rupture. Like this lady, she was just being treated with topical uh, steroids and antibiotics and homatropine elsewhere. And then actually what she had was a rupture through her cataract wound with prolapse of the ciliary body. There was a vitreous hemorrhage, of course, and she needed vitrectomy. I was not actually prepared with a scleral graft at that point of time. So I just, picked up some Tenon's capsule and applied it over that. And we had a good outcome from PL vision. She maintained 618 N12 vision. The only enigma is that with a good-looking macula, why is she not, 6/9 or 6/6 partial? It still remains an enigma. Perhaps it has to do with, the refractive errors which have been created. Chorioretinitis, I thought I'll just touch upon this as well. So this was a young person working in a factory making huge machinery, in fact, for the automobile industry. And one day there was, a part, large machine tool broke off into two, and a large part flew like a missile and hit him on the eye. And he presented to us with that cataract, defective projection vision, and this is what happened during the surgery. Generally, these eyes have a very poor outcome. So here I said that let me see. Obviously at this stage we didn't know that what's there lurking behind. So lensectomy was performed. There was pre-retinal blood which was removed, apart from the vitreous intragel hemorrhage, and then the true extent of the damage got revealed. The entire macula was fired. Notwithstanding, I said, let me just clean up as much of it as possible. Here, what I decided is that for whatever it is worth, let's peel off the internal limiting membrane. The objective is that ILM, as all of us are aware, it's basically the footplates of the Mueller cells, which not only support, but they also can become supportive of supportive of the glial tissue which gets formed on and under the retina. So I said that let's remove the ILM so as to purportedly reduce the amount of scarring which might occur. And then after a good cleanup at the end, we did a pupilloplasty, fluid gas exchange, and eventually injection of triamcinolone on the surface. This is just for some of the young people who might be attending our video. Baraker's tonometer can be used intraoperatively. So chorioretinitis clopidemia, so Clopitus is basically an old Italian style gun. It has this terminology has many synonyms, but basically because there's no inflammatory component per se or severe inflammatory component, so retinitis or chorioretinitis clopidemia is used commonly, or just traumatic chorioretinal rupture. So basically what happens is it's a closed globe injury where the missile-like object with a very high velocity either passes close to tangent and tangential to the globe, or it also impacts the globe at a very high velocity. At that point of time, the elasticity of the choroid and retina on one hand is different from the elasticity of the sclera overlying and the posterior hyaloid, which is usually attached because these are injuries which occur in young people. So the posterior hyaloid phase and the sclera have different elasticity, are different, and so the choroid and retina tend to rupture, and they retract. The posterior hyaloid remains intact and the bare sclera typically gets exposed. Now, usually it's believed to be a coup injury, but in our case, it's more like a contra coup injury, that the shock waves impact was so strong that it not only created that cataract, it caused traumatic maculopathy and also retinitis clopidemia inferior to the macula and the optic nerve head, as was seen. Uh, Typically, these things occur with BB gun or shotgun injuries, but can also occur with the fugas which are thrown during Govinda or Holi. And as in this particular case, it was at the place of work, occupational hazard. So these are these serial scans of that patient post-vitrectomy, where we see that the retina is thinned out and eventually just replaced by scar tissue formation. And because there are no photoreceptors, some amount of hyperplasia of the RPE occurs. There is transformation also which occurs and which leads to scar tissue formation. So one can see how the scar tissue has grown across the macula. This eye it recovered 6/120 vision initially, but after about 3 years, it's down to about 6/239. I have told the patient whether he would be keen to undergo any revitrectomy. He's not very keen, so we just rest at this. Uh, uh, I shall be very happy to, if there are any questions from the audience, we shall be very happy to answer them. Is my screen share gone now?
It's still there, sir.
On? No? Anyways,
Paritosh,
I have a question for all the panelists, that in case we have an open globe injury, what kind of anesthesia do we prefer? Does everybody go in for only general anesthesia, whether IV or does anybody use local anesthesia also?
no, open globe, I prefer general anesthesia.
Sharad, Swapnesh?
Yeah, general anesthesia is ideal and it should be done in majority of the cases. But sometimes the repair has to be taken at odd times where the anesthetist may not be available, or we cannot wait for the unavailability of an anesthetist. So at in those patients, we do give a subconjunctival infiltration and midazolam. We ourselves give it, and then we take cardinal sutures to seal the wound. And after that, if the pain is there, we can infiltrate a bit of local anesthesia. You top it up as and when it is required. But most of the times, with the combination of topical anesthesia, perilimbal anesthesia, and intravenous midazolam, and taking cardinal sutures, and then give little by little top up or local anesthesia, we are able to manage most of the injuries. Unless they are very posterior scleral tears, we can manage in most of the patients, even under local anesthesia. But if the intraocular contents are already outside, especially if you are seeing the retinal tissue outside, then it is very dangerous to give a local anesthetic. In those patients, we put a tight bandage and then give general anesthesia, because even that procedure of giving general anesthesia can cause bucking, or sometimes, so it can worsen the prolapse of the condition or contents of the globe. So you give a tight bandage, give general anesthesia, and then you open up. That's what we follow.
Paritosh, one question to you.
Yeah.
Like, suppose, or anybody can answer. Suppose, say, you go in.
Just before we go to that, Karobi, one thing I would like to add is that whenever we are with an open globe or a suspect open globe, if we are doing it, if you're going to use any local anesthesia, it should be preservative free. So xylocaine can be either the intraocular xylocaine, which is available, or it can be even the cardiac Xylocard. which is
Xylocard.
supposed to be
You get phenocaine also now from, I think, Entod makes it.
no, that contains phenylephrine and tropicamide also.
Huh.
So that's okay. You use it intraocular, but it's a very small quantity that we need to use. Otherwise, it can cause endothelial damage or other. Yes, Swapnesh, please.
Decision to whether to give a GA or a LA really depends on the fasting of the patient, because if suppose we consider a scenario that he's coming at the odd time of the day and we have to operate, the patient is insisting on operating, and are we then operating without anesthetist? Because if the anesthetist is there around, then why not wait for 3 hours more or 4 hours more, whatever it permits, and then give a GA. So especially doing these trauma cases without anesthetist on paper, medical legally, it could be a challenge. So only from that point of view, obviously a scleral wound, a small laceration, we all know we can give blocks and do it. But then are we then doing it without anesthetist? Even that is not like a good thing to do without anesthetist.
Swapnesh, I wanted to add, Paritosh, that anyways you have to do the investigation. So sometime we'll go in that. You can easily arrange for an anesthetist in that point of time.
Yes.
But sometimes I still
Fasting
remember
also
of
can
my
be maintained at that time.
yeah my good old days in when I used to visit Miraj. Getting an anesthesiologist sometimes used to be really very difficult. So I guess I don't know what's the situation now, but I guess sometimes those difficulties must be arising even now. Those are the sorry, Karobi, please, you had a question.
No, I had a question is that suppose say you go in and you are operating and then you find that there is underlying an endophthalmitis, you have a detachment. What would you do? You would proceed. I mean, if you find a hole, and would you proceed in the view that maybe later you will go back and treat the detachment, or you would leave it alone and come out?
No, I would go ahead, treat the endophthalmitis. I mean, in the sense, do the vitrectomy for that also. But I would go ahead and induce as much of a PVD as I safely can without creating too many breaks. But I will treat that detachment, and I will go ahead and put silicone oil inside that eye. And I will cover it up with systemic antibiotics, IV antibiotics.
What about the rest of you?
I think if it is possible to do the surgery, it should be done in the same sitting. That's the ideal thing. We should do it.
Yes.
because things are going to get only worse when we postpone it.
Swapnish, what about you?
Yes, sir. If the media is clear, just go ahead and try and settle the detachment.
All these eyes are going to mean such an eye is obviously going to require multiple resurgery.
Interventions.
But then at least let's, because otherwise if we don't fix it then there's a very high likelihood that it might go into a closed funnel RD with a PVR, and then may become difficult to open it up later on by the time the inflammation has reasonably subsided. Do any of the panelists have any other questions? I'm sorry, because of the glitches at my end in the beginning, I think we've overshot the time. Do any of the audience have any other questions? I think there was only...
There was just one question in the chat box that we have not answered. If it's necessary to do an MRI from medico-legal perspective, even if the globe is intact, or if there's just a suspicion, but we have not been able to prove a foreign body.
what is your answer to that?
So I'd say no, MRI is not justified doing just an MRI just because we want to complete a medico-legal aspect. If we are suspecting, then we are anyway going to do a B scan or a CT scan, which is more easily available and much more affordable compared to an MRI.
Wouldn't if you are not very sure and just a mild suspicion is there, just to cover the medico-legal aspect, wouldn't a simple X-ray, PNS with Waters, Caldwell's, and lateral view be sufficient?
Yes,
that would be more than sufficient.
Because I still follow that, and
yes.
Then if required, then we pursue further imaging. Are there any other questions or points of discussion from the panelists? So thank you very much, all of you. It's been an excellent course, and all of you had excellent videos. Most grateful. Thank you very much for all your presentations. And I hope whoever from the audience attended also, I hope they benefited. And thank you once again, MOSCON, for this opportunity.
Paritosh, thank you very much. It was a nice instruction course.
Thank you, Karobi.
Thank you,
sir, and thank you all the
Dr.
presenters.
Paritosh bhai, thank you, Karobi. Thank you, Boman
The
sir.
next session,
Yeah,
Thank you,
the
Dipti. Thank you, Swapnesh.